What's up, football fanatics? Today we're diving deep into the wild world of players who were so good at breaking the system that the league said, nope, we're not doing this anymore. Buckle up, because some of these stories are absolutely mind-blowing. The legendary Don Hutson, the receiver who broke football. Let's start with the granddaddy of rule changes, Don Hutson of the Green Bay Packers. This guy was so far ahead of his time that he basically invented modern pass catching in the 1930s and 40s. Picture this. While most teams were still treating the forward pass like some experimental gimmick, Hutson was out there running precise routes and making catches that left defenders wondering if they'd accidentally wandered into a different sport. Hutson's dominance was absolutely ridiculous. In 1942, he caught 74 passes, which was more than entire teams were catching back then. The man was literally playing a different game than everyone else on the field. His precise route running and reliable hands were so revolutionary that defensive coordinators had nightmares about covering him. But here's where it gets interesting. Hutson's success directly led to the NFL implementing substitution rules. Back then, players played both offense and defense, but Hutson was such a weapon that teams started using specialized players just to cover him. The league eventually had to create formal substitution rules to manage this new reality. Talk about being so good, you literally change how football is played. Mel Blount, the cornerback who made receivers extinct. Fast forward to the 1970s, and we meet Mel Blount, a 6'3" cornerback for the Pittsburgh Steelers who turned pass coverage into a contact sport. This guy didn't just cover receivers. He basically assaulted them legally for 60 minutes every Sunday. Blount would jam receivers at the line, bump them throughout their routes, and generally make catching passes feel like surviving a car crash. The Steelers' steel curtain defense was already legendary, but Blount took it to another level. He was so physical with receivers that passing games across the league were getting completely shut down. Quarterbacks were afraid to throw anywhere near him, and receivers were probably considering career changes after facing Pittsburgh. By 1978, the NFL had seen enough. They implemented what's now known as the Mel Blount rule. Defensive backs could only make contact with receivers within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. Beyond that, hands off. This single rule change opened up the modern passing game and led to the explosive offensive numbers we see today. One man literally forced the NFL to make the game more offense-friendly. Before we dive into the next legend, do me a quick favor. Tap that like button and subscribe. It's free, and it helps more than a linebacker blitzing on third and long. Let's keep the momentum going. Lester Hayes, the Stick'em Bandit. Here's a story that sounds like something out of a cartoon. Lester Hayes, the Oakland Raiders cornerback, discovered that covering his hands and arms in Stickum, a legal adhesive spray, made intercepting passes ridiculously easy. We're talking about a guy who went from decent corner to interception machine literally overnight. In 1980, Hayes picked off 13 passes, which is still tied for the single-season record. But here's the kicker. He was basically playing with glue on his hands. Imagine trying to throw a pass near this guy when he's essentially got spider powers. Quarterbacks were throwing perfect spirals that would just stick to Hayes like he was made of flypaper. The NFL watched this sticky situation unfold for a season and said, absolutely not. In 1981, they banned Stickum entirely. Hayes' interception numbers dropped dramatically the following year, proving just how much of that adhesive was helping him. It's probably the only time in NFL history where a rule change involved literal chemistry. The steel curtain's intimidation tactics. Speaking of the Pittsburgh Steelers, their entire defensive philosophy in the 1970s was so brutal that multiple rule changes can be traced back to their tactics. Jack Lambert's headhunting, Mean Joe Green's creative interpretations of unnecessary roughness, and the general mayhem of the steel curtain forced the NFL to get serious about player safety. The Steelers were essentially playing football like it was medieval combat. They'd hit quarterbacks after throws, level receivers coming across the middle, and generally turn every play into potential highlight reel violence. While fans loved the intensity, the league realized they needed to protect their most valuable assets, the players themselves. This led to numerous rules protecting quarterbacks, including restrictions on hitting QBs after they've thrown the ball and penalties for targeting defenseless receivers. The steel curtain didn't just dominate opponents, they forced the NFL to civilize the game itself. Deacon Jones, the head slap master. Before there were rules about what you could and couldn't do to offensive linemen, there was Deacon Jones. This Los Angeles Rams defensive end perfected something called the head slap. Exactly what it sounds like. Jones would literally slap offensive linemen in the head to disorient them before rushing the quarterback. And let me tell you, this wasn't some gentle tap. Jones was delivering these slaps with the force of a heavyweight boxer, leaving offensive linemen seeing stars and wondering what truck just hit them. The technique was so effective that other pass rushers started copying it, turning the trenches into what looked like a Three Stooges routine. The NFL eventually banned the head slap in 1977, but not before Jones used it to terrorize quarterbacks for over a decade. He coined the term sack and perfected techniques that were so devastating they had to be outlawed. That's leaving a legacy. Jerry Rice, the receiver who made defense impossible. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Jerry Rice was so impossibly good at running routes and catching passes that the NFL had to subtly adjust rules just to give defenses a fighting chance. While there wasn't one specific Jerry Rice rule, his dominance contributed to several defensive-friendly adjustments throughout the 1990s. Rice's precision route running, combined with his partnership with Joe Montana and later Steve Young, made the San Francisco 49ers passing attack nearly unstoppable. He was catching 100-plus passes per season when most receivers were happy to hit 60. His ability to find soft spots in coverage and make contested catches was so advanced that defensive coordinators were pulling their hair out trying to scheme against him. The league gradually implemented rules allowing more physical coverage and adjusted timing rules to help defenses keep up with Rice's otherworldly abilities. It's probably the only time in sports history where someone was so good at their job that the rules had to be tweaked just to maintain competitive balance. Gale Sayers. Before Gale Sayers, kickoff returns were usually pretty boring affairs. Catch the ball, run forward, get tackled. Sayers turned every kickoff into must-see television. This Chicago Bears running back had such incredible vision, acceleration, and cutting ability that he was averaging nearly 30 yards per return throughout his career. Sayers would take kickoffs and turn them into video game highlights, weaving through entire special teams units like they were standing still. His 1967 season was particularly ridiculous. He was essentially scoring touchdowns from kickoffs at will. Special teams coordinators were having panic attacks every time they had to kick to Chicago. The NFL eventually moved kickoffs forward and implemented stricter rules about wedge blocking to reduce the explosive return potential that Sayers had exploited so masterfully. One man literally made kickoffs less exciting for everyone who came after him. Tom Brady's tuck rule legacy. Here's a controversial one that still gets Patriots fans and Raiders fans arguing in comment sections. The infamous tuck rule wasn't created because of Tom Brady, but his 2001 playoff game against Oakland made it the most famous rule interpretation in NFL history. When Brady appeared to fumble, but the refs ruled it an incomplete pass due to the tuck rule, it not only saved the Patriots' season, but launched a dynasty. The rule was so confusing and situational that even veteran officials had trouble calling it consistently. After years of debate and confusion, the NFL finally eliminated the tuck rule in 2013. While Brady didn't create the rule, his benefit from it was so significant that it became forever associated with his name. Sometimes being connected to a rule change isn't about what you did wrong. It's about being in the right place at the right time when a weird rule works in your favor. Calvin Johnson, the catch rule casualty. Before we dive into more modern examples, we need to talk about Calvin Johnson and one of the most controversial rule interpretations in NFL history. Megatron was so good at making impossible catches that when he did make them, the refs sometimes couldn't believe it was legal. The infamous 2010 play against Chicago saw Johnson catch what looked like a game-winning touchdown, only to have it overturned because he didn't maintain possession through the process of the catch. The ball touched the ground as he rolled over, and suddenly one of the most athletic catches ever made was ruled incomplete. This wasn't technically Johnson's fault, but his superhuman catching ability highlighted how outdated the catch rules had become. The NFL spent years trying to define what constitutes a catch, partly because players like Johnson were making plays that didn't fit the old definitions. Sometimes being too good at your job creates problems nobody saw coming. Sean Taylor, the safety who made kickoffs terrifying. Sean Taylor was an absolute menace on special teams, but not in the way you'd expect from a safety. This Washington defender was so aggressive and athletic that he turned kickoff coverage into appointment television. Taylor would line up, sprint down the field like a guided missile, and absolutely obliterate return men who thought they were safe. His most famous hit came against a punter in the Pro Bowl. Yes, the Pro Bowl, where he destroyed a guy who was just trying to have a fun week in Hawaii. Taylor treated every kickoff like it was the Super Bowl, and his violent collisions became legendary among fans and nightmarish for returners. The NFL eventually implemented stricter rules about kickoff collisions and wedge blocking, partly because players like Taylor were turning routine plays into highlight reel violence. When you're so intense that you force rule changes in the Pro Bowl, you've reached legendary status. Randy Moss, the receiver who broke defensive schemes. Randy Moss was so fast and so tall that defensive coordinators literally had to invent new coverage concepts just to slow him down. This Vikings receiver could run past anyone, outjump anyone, and catch passes that seemed physically impossible. Defensive backs were getting burned so badly that some probably considered early retirement. Moss's rookie season was absolutely ridiculous. 17 touchdown catches from a player who wasn't even supposed to be the number one option. His speed was video game unrealistic, and his hands were so reliable that Brett Favre once said throwing to Moss was like throwing to a magnet. While there wasn't one specific Randy Moss rule, his dominance led to several defensive adjustments. The NFL allowed more physical coverage, adjusted illegal contact interpretations, and generally tried to give defenses more tools to handle receivers who could make defensive backs look like they were running in quicksand. Sometimes your impact on the game is measured not by one rule, but by forcing everyone to completely rethink how defenses played. Rob Gronkowski, the tight end who redefined the position. Gronk was such a matchup nightmare that opposing teams literally didn't know how to cover him. Too big for safeties, too fast for linebackers, and too athletic for anyone to handle one-on-one. The Patriots tight end turned every play into a potential touchdown threat, and defensive coordinators were pulling their hair out trying to scheme against him. His partnership with Tom Brady was so lethal that the NFL had to adjust how defensive holding and illegal contact were called on tight ends. Gronk was getting mugged on every play because it was the only way to slow him down, but refs weren't calling penalties consistently. The league eventually clarified that tight ends deserved the same protection as wide receivers on passing plays. Plus, Gronk's celebration antics were so over the top that the NFL had to remind players about excessive celebration rules. When your touchdown dances are forcing league memos, you know you're doing something memorable. Peyton Manning, the audible master. Peyton Manning was so good at reading defenses and changing plays at the line that he basically turned football into chess. His pre-snap adjustments were so complex and effective that the NFL had to implement play clock and communication rules to prevent games from turning into 3-hour audible sessions. Manning would stand at the line for what felt like an eternity, pointing, shouting, and completely changing the entire offensive game plan based on what he saw. Defensive coordinators were getting so frustrated that they started using more complex signals and late shifts just to confuse him. The NFL eventually implemented stricter play clock enforcement and communication rules, partly because Manning's pre-snap mastery was slowing games to a crawl. When your football IQ is so high that it affects the pace of play, you've transcended normal quarterback abilities. Tyreek Hill, the speed demon. Tyreek Hill is so fast that he's basically playing a different sport than everyone else on the field. This Chiefs receiver can turn any play into a touchdown threat, and his speed has forced defensive coordinators to completely rethink their coverage schemes. Hill's ability to score from anywhere on the field led to adjustments in how defenses play coverage. Teams started using more deep safeties and conservative schemes just to prevent him from running past the entire secondary. His speed was so game-changing that defensive coordinators were sacrificing other aspects of their game plan just to account for one player. While still active, Hill's impact on defensive strategy has been so significant that future rule adjustments wouldn't be surprising. When one player forces an entire league to play more conservatively, that's legendary status. Aaron Donald, the interior pass rush revolution. Aaron Donald has been so dominant as an interior pass rusher that offensive coordinators have had to completely reimagine their protection schemes. This Rams defensive tackle generates pressure from the inside at a rate that shouldn't be humanly possible, and his impact has forced several blocking rule clarifications. Donald's ability to beat double teams and get to quarterbacks in under 3 seconds has led to adjustments in how holding is called on interior linemen. Offensive lines were getting so desperate to stop him that they were basically tackling him on every play, forcing refs to be more consistent about interior line penalties. His dominance has also influenced how the NFL views defensive tackles in pass rush situations, with rule clarifications about what constitutes legal versus illegal techniques when rushing from the interior. When your pass rush is so unstoppable that it forces technical rule adjustments, you've reached elite status. Darren Sproles, the punt return specialist. Darren Sproles was so dangerous as a punt returner that special teams coordinators started punting out of bounds rather than give him opportunities. This tiny dynamo could turn any punt into a potential touchdown, and his field vision was so good that he made 10 other players look foolish on a regular basis. Sproles' success led to adjustments in punt coverage rules and fair catch regulations. Teams were so afraid of his returnability, they were changing their entire punting strategies, leading to less exciting field position battles. The NFL had to balance maintaining excitement while preventing one player from completely dominating special teams. His impact on punt coverage schemes was so significant that many teams started using directional punting and coffin corner strategies just to avoid giving him clean looks. When your return skills force an entire phase of the game to become more conservative, that's incredible individual impact. Antonio Brown, the route running perfectionist. Before his off-field issues, Antonio Brown was such a precise route runner that defensive backs couldn't stay with him even when they knew exactly where he was going. His ability to create separation through technique rather than pure athleticism was so advanced that it highlighted flaws in how defensive holding and illegal contact were being called. Brown's route precision led to more consistent officiating of hand fighting between receivers and defensive backs. His ability to make defenders look foolish through pure technique forced the NFL to be more clear about what constitutes legal versus illegal contact during route running. The Steelers receiver was so good at exploiting the rules within routes that defensive coordinators had to teach entirely new techniques just to stay competitive. When your route running forces defensive coaching evolution, you've mastered your craft at the highest level. J.J. Watt, the defensive end who did everything. J.J. Watt was so athletically gifted that he started lining up at multiple positions and even catching touchdown passes on offense. His versatility was so unique that the NFL had to clarify reporting requirements when defensive players lined up in offensive positions. Watt's ability to rush the passer, defend the run, knock down passes, and even catch touchdowns made him a matchup nightmare that defied traditional position classifications. His success led to rule clarifications about when defensive players need to report as eligible receivers and how substitution rules apply to players switching between sides of the ball. His impact on how teams use versatile defensive players has been so significant that many teams now employ similar multi-positional strategies. When your versatility forces position classification rule adjustments, you've revolutionized how football is played. And there you have it, football fanatics. From Don Hutson's revolutionary receiving to Mel Blount's physical coverage, these legends didn't just play the game. They forced everyone else to play it differently. These rule changes are monuments to individual excellence and innovation. Which of these stories surprised you the most? Are there any players you think should have had rules made because of them? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Smash that like button if you enjoy diving into football history. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the weird and wonderful world of the NFL. Peace out.